Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Northpoint Vineyard Online. My name is Katie, and I am the ministry director here at the church. If you were with us in person last week or watched us online, you heard Tara introduce our Picture This Giving campaign. So before we get started with today's message, I have an update on that giving campaign. I want to take the next few minutes to give you the briefest recap of that info, provide some new information that we received this week, and give you some financial info about why this giving campaign is so important to our church and why my family is excited about it. At the end, I'm going to give you 2 action items for you to put on your to-do list to help us in this giving campaign. So to recap, we've been on a journey for the past few months to find a new church home for Northpoint. Tara left us on a cliffhanger last week. She reminded us that we'd recently put in an offer on a church building that is currently owned by Redeemer Missionary Church. And we were just waiting on their church board to vote on our offer. And we don't have an official signed offer yet, but that is not bad news at all. And let me tell you what we do have. We have verbal confirmation from the leadership at Redeemer Missionary Church that they've accepted our offer. And we are finalizing our purchase agreement, having conversations about the details in that purchase agreement, and we are moving forward with inspections. So that is good news, church. We are moving forward and we are excited. Continue to pray with us over this endeavor as we finalize all those details. The prayer we're praying during this season is Ephesians 3:20-21. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. So let's shift gears, church, and talk about some of the details of our giving campaign. The offer we put in for the Redeemer facility was $250,000. With 25% down and closing costs, our giving campaign goal is to raise $65,000 by November 21st. Currently, we have gifts and commitments totaling $53,021. Are you guys kidding me? That means we only need a little under $12,000 to reach our goal. That is incredible after only the first week of our giving campaign. So you might not know, I do all of the finances for Northpoint, all of the bill paying and the bookkeeping for the church. It's one of my favorite things about my job. I love numbers, I love that they make sense, and I love helping our church responsibly spend and save money. So part of my job is to show you today why this move to the Redeemer building makes so much sense financially. Take a look at this slide. You'll see a breakdown of our monthly costs here at our current building on the left and the Redeemer building on the right. A few things I'd like to point out. First, you'll see there's a huge difference between the lease payment here and the mortgage payment for the Redeemer building. And as you probably realize, when you lease, that money goes to the landlord. But with a mortgage, our church will own this building and hopefully be able to pay it off and have a place for Northpoint to exist for decades. Our utilities will decrease in a smaller building, and we expect our liability insurance to decrease in a smaller building as well. These are conservative estimates based on the information I have right now, but even with conservative estimates, the new building will cost less than 40% of what we're paying right now. And that doesn't take into account what we'll save on maintaining a right for us sized building that has been well taken care of by the current occupants. And because we're saving money on a new facility, we get to focus those funds on other ministries like outreach, benevolence, Kids Point, and student ministries. Each week, we've asked someone from Northpoint to share their reason for giving to the Picture This Giving campaign. So watch this video from our friends Nat and Michelle.
Hey everybody, Nat and Michelle here. Most of you probably know we have been part of Northpoint since Tara asked us to leave our last church to come with her to start a new church in South Bend.
Yeah, and we both said yes because we really love South Bend and the whole community, so we wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, and it's been hard the last few years. It's been good being where we are, but it's been hard to be in a church that's not in the community we love. But it's been made pretty obvious that we can't stay.
Yeah.
So
So we're excited to give to this campaign so that we can actually move back to South Bend and be in the neighborhood, serving the community
Yeah.
and the people that we really feel drawn to serve in South Bend.
yeah. Yeah, so that's why we're giving. We hope that it helps you out.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Love you guys. Bye.
I've thrown a lot at you today, but I hope you're as excited as our team is about this. I'll end with the 2 action items I have for you. First, I'd like you to prayerfully consider what it might look like for you to contribute to this giving campaign. For some of you, you might have savings you'd consider gifting. For others, a sacrificial gift may look like looking at your monthly budget and moving some things around. For my family, we decided to put off a home project that we'd been saving for and instead reallocate that money towards the giving campaign. And I could give you so many reasons why we're choosing to give to this campaign. Because we see the difference Northpoint has had in our lives and in the lives of others. Because we believe in the local church. Because Northpoint is our church home. But also because we know it's fiscally the right thing for Northpoint to do at this time. So my first action item is to consider what it might look like for you to contribute to this giving campaign with a gift that is right-sized for you. And then plan on joining us on Sunday, November 21st, in person or online, for what we hope will be our all-church celebration. The second thing I have for you today is to please put Sunday, November 7th on your calendar and join us for an all-church workday. I have a few fantastic volunteers who have been working for months to organize and clean out rooms, but we could really use one big workday to get us ready to move when we're able. We'll feed you lunch after service, and then we'll spend a few hours cleaning, packing, moving. If you plan to come, please sign up on our website, on the Church Center app, or email me at katie@northpointvineyard.com so we can plan on the right amount of food. We will not have childcare for the workday. Okay, that's it from me. I for sure have talked enough this morning. Next up, we will move to message time with John Brunsma. Most of you know John, but if you don't, John serves on our board and on our lead team. He's been with Northpoint since the church planted so many years ago. John listens to the Lord really well and includes so much wisdom in his messages. I'm really excited for you to hear from John today.
Hi, Northpoint. I've got a question for you this morning. What type of person are you? A big picture person or a details person? We're all wired differently. I tend to be a big picture thinker. My wife, on the other hand, tends to be a details person. So it leads to some interesting dynamics in our relationship, as you might well imagine. Recently, we were planning a trip down to her parents' house. They live about an hour away. So we were going there after work on a Friday. And big picture, right? We both have to get down there, and we were going to spend the night. So what did I do? I packed my bike with me that morning, and I rode down after work. But I forgot that she was going to leave her car there for her sister who was visiting from out of town to use. Well, when I arrived on my bike, let's just say we had to make other arrangements. Oops. Both perspectives, big picture and details, are critical, right? We need both. Neither is better or worse. But let's face it, people with one personality type or the other may have areas to which they need to devote more attention because of their inherent tendency to think at like one opposite end of the spectrum or the other. For instance, I need to make sure that I don't overlook details or planning when I'm thinking big picture. So how does all of this fit into our current message series called The God Who Speaks? Well, I'm getting there, but it has a lot to do with how we listen and how we interpret the meaning behind the details of God's messages that are honestly woven into our daily lives. And here's the thing, we can easily get so caught up in all of the details, lost in the weeds, right, that we can sometimes miss the forest through the trees. So indeed, hearing from God has a lot to do with how you listen. And many times we listen only for what we want to hear or know how to hear. But what if the message that God wants to give you is so much bigger that we really won't be able to appreciate it or even see it unless we step back, zoom out to take it all in. So the point is that God's perspective is so much bigger than ours, and his vantage point is so much higher that the vision he communicates when he speaks to us sometimes requires that we extend our own vision. That's what I want to talk about today. How best to listen to the God who speaks so that we don't miss what he might be trying to tell us. So for lack of better words, I'm going to call this big picture listening. Let me backtrack a little bit and try to explain this concept, right? Have you ever tried to explain something like conceptual to a child? So when I was very young, I couldn't understand for the life of me why it looked like the moon in the night sky was following our car when we were driving. So, as a fixture in the night sky, the bright moon, hundreds of miles away, seemed to skip over housetops and trees as we drove along. And so all of the stationary objects were just passing by and the moon remained fixed. Of course, that illusion is caused by the positioning of objects in our depth of vision, right? But without the ability to visualize the moon in relation to the earth, a big picture vantage point, I really couldn't grasp the concept. Of course, now that I understand the big picture of the solar system, I have no trouble understanding that optical phenomenon. And that can apply to many other things in life as well. Those questions, those struggles that we have now may seem remarkably simple as we grow and as we mature. And the same can apply to how we hear God's voice. It makes me think of what Paul wrote, actually, to the Corinthians. He says this in Corinthians 13:12. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So right now we have only a limited perspective. We see through a mirror dimly. And while we can't understand the mysteries of the universe on this side of heaven, we can change the way that we listen. We can come to God ready to hear his big picture. So today I want to take a look at 4 ways that we might potentially miss God's big picture for us, and then share a few ways that we can start to practice and integrate big picture listening as we interact with him. So, to start off, here is one way that we can miss the big picture that God has. Sometimes, right, when we come to God, our thoughts are so cluttered that they tend to get in the way of what he might have for us. We spew out the details of our worries and concerns without ever taking the time to actually listen to him, right? Sometimes God has priorities that are far different from our own, but we have to take the time to listen and to understand them. So, in order to unpack this, let me share the example recorded by Luke of Jesus' interaction with Mary and Martha. So, it goes like this. Luke 10:38-42 is where I'm reading from. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, why don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." So here we see Martha, who's just too busy fretting and telling Jesus what was wrong, while Mary was the one sitting and listening at Jesus' feet. How many times are we replicating Martha's example. We come to God and our communication is just so jammed with our anxieties and our asks of God that the details of our cares and concerns prevent us from hearing the one thing that is better. The one thing that is better and will not be taken away from her. In fact, some versions actually say, instead of the one thing that is better, they say the one thing, that good part, what is really needed. And this is not to say that, God cares nothing about the details of our lives. On the contrary, he cares very deeply about every single aspect of our life. But the key point to remember is that he already knows those details. So rather than turning our prayers into like these laundry lists of to-do or fix-it items for God, what's often more beneficial is to simply spend time listening to him, simply sitting in his presence without a purpose, without an agenda. So here's a question to reflect on. Is the reason that you don't hear God's voice simply because you don't give him time to talk? Remember, communication goes both ways. So be sure to spend at least as much time listening as you do talking. To be honest, that's not the way that we grow up being taught to pray. This is a reversal of our norm. Another way that, this can play out and prevent us from seeing God's big picture is in how we view ourselves. What I mean by that is how we view ourselves in relation to God. We often tend to miss his messages because we see our most recent mistake. And we think that we can't approach God, that he's not going to talk to us or communicate because of our shortcomings. So we avoid him, right? But God doesn't see those mistakes. He sees us as his creation, his child, for whom he has an important and a special purpose. He sees us not for who we are, not what our inadequacies might indicate, not what our most recent failure is, but for who we are becoming. God has a larger vision for us than we may ever be able to conceptualize. So don't allow a negative or limited view of yourself to stifle that. Our negative perception can prevent us from even trusting his voice. I'm not worthy. That's impossible for me to do. I'm not good enough. Much like the example from Scripture of Moses' response to God's call. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 10, Moses says to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Wow. Moses had apparently a really low opinion of himself. And it's telling, isn't it, that his insecurity had to do with his voice. Last week, Tara talked about how God gave each of us a unique voice and individual insights, passions, life experiences that he wants to use for kingdom purposes. Yet so often we see those parts of us that are different as defects, when actually God sees them as assets. So the version of yourself that you see is not what God sees. Don't allow self-doubt to crowd out his voice. The third way that we often fail to hear God's bigger perspective is by praying prescriptive, limited prayers. So I know that's maybe difficult words, but I think we do this so often that we don't even realize we're doing it. Again, it has to do a lot with the way that we're brought up thinking about prayer sometimes. So we preclude God from speaking into a situation by asking him to work kind of in the way that we desire. And don't get me wrong, God wants to intervene in our day-to-day struggles. He wants to give us good things and fulfill the deep desires of our hearts. So it's good to pray those specific focused prayers, but when we go to God to ask for his intervention or his help, we have to be open to the way that he wants to work in that circumstance. So don't go to him asking for an answer and telling him the answer in the same breath. Don't go to him asking for an answer and telling him the answer in the same breath. So here's an example from my own life, right? I actually recently reread some journal entries from the last couple of years. And keep in mind, that's really not as impressive as it sounds. I'm terrible at keeping up with journaling. But looking back over the past few years, in 2018, 2019, early 2020, it was evident I was very dissatisfied in my job. I loved the work that I was doing, but I felt stymied by organizational politics and an increasingly toxic work environment. So as a result, my journal entries were full of requests to God to fix my work, fix my job, change my boss. What I didn't know at the time, though, is that his answer would come in a way that I least expected. He didn't fix my job, but he gave me an answer in the form of a different job at a different organization, honestly, in a position that I never would have dreamed myself capable of attaining. See, I was asking God for the answer that I thought he should give me, when all the while he wanted to broaden my perspective so that I wouldn't miss this amazing answer that he had waiting in the wings, wanting to provide. So focusing on listening for his direction, allowing him to shape and to mold me into what he wanted me to be, instead of what I thought needed to happen, would actually have been a better use of my time. So finally, it's important to remember that our communication with God is actually not always just between him and us, vertical, us and God, but that there's an important horizontal aspect to it as well, right? Very often when God speaks, it has to do with how we relate to others around us. How should God's long-term perspective, therefore, influence how we interact with others? And I would submit, particularly with others who could easily be written off otherwise. We see Jesus doing this in his interaction with the woman caught in adultery, which is a story that's recorded in John chapter 8. And you guys have heard this story. Essentially, the scene opens with the religious elite and the ensuing, crowd dragging a woman caught in the act of adultery in front of Jesus. And trying to trap Jesus, they forced him to answer the question of whether or not the crowd should stone her, as was written in the law. Details. Jesus responded, though, by stooping down, writing in the dust with his finger. As the crowd persisted, he eventually answered, "All right, stone her. But let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped back down and just continued writing in the dust. We all know what happened, right? The self-righteous crowd lost their brash confidence. He took the wind out of their sails. One by one, they quietly slipped away, dropping their stones behind them as they left. And then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." It's a quick narrative, but it's packed with meaning, right? First, the teachers are this accurate, though unfortunate, representation of how we often communicate with God. We look to God to vindicate us. We want to hear him say that we're right. The teachers were asking Jesus to confirm that they should go ahead and stone that woman. But by attempting to use God's voice to give ourselves like the moral high ground or to prove a point, aren't we doing the same thing as the Pharisees, as the accusing crowd, manipulating God's message to suit our own self-interest? Jesus then helps them to see the bigger picture, because he forces them to reflect on their own sin. And in doing so, he exposes their selfish motives. All the while, he's down writing in the dust. We aren't told what he's writing. And you know what? That used to really bother me. What is he writing? I need to know. But we aren't told. And I actually think that's part of the point. The details don't matter here. We have all sinned. We can't condemn others as a result. So focus on what you do from here on out. Go and sin no more. You know, I see this story playing out actually a lot right now. I see it playing out every time Jesus or Christianity is associated with either a political group or people attempting to assert themselves as superior to others. Just like the religious elite, the Pharisees in the story, we still fall into that trap of thinking that we have everything figured out, that our position is right, and at the extreme, we begin to use that to feel entitled to attack other people, especially when they don't fit our preferred mold. I also see this every time that we disregard other people who we consider to be the other or the outcast. Be that because of their politics or their race or their gender orientation, or simply because they just don't fit in. Remember that God chose David, the most unlikely, considered to be the most unlikely of Jesse's 8 boys, to become the king of his people, to lead the nation of Israel. The one boy that no one else considered, even to the point that Jesse didn't even include him when he introduced his sons to the prophet. That was the child that God had chosen. See, God doesn't just speak to us about, us. He speaks to us about other people. And he wants to use our voice to influence other people as well. So stop and consider, what might he want to tell you about that person that gets passed over all the time at work? That person that's awkward or difficult to spend time around? What about that person that you just lambasted in a social media post? Or the person on the opposite side of the political aisle from your persuasions? What about undocumented immigrants or people on welfare or minorities? What does God say about them? Jesus made it clear that he sees value in every person, regardless. He communicated the long-term value of that woman who was caught in the act of adultery. She was not what her actions, however shameful, dictated her to be. See, every person has that unique purpose and voice that needs to be heard. They're all equal parts, made as a representation of God to portray his image to the world in totally different but equally beautiful ways. And that's what the God who speaks says about them and desperately wants to communicate to them. And there's a good chance that he wants to use your voice to convey that message. So what do we do with all of this? How do we respond to a God who speaks from the vantage point of eternity while we rely on our human, limited, time-bound experiences? During the last part of our time together today, I want to share with you some ways that we can start to practice big picture listening. And so, first, I'm going to share a few scriptures that you can reflect on And well, I'd encourage you to find scriptures of your own that help to extend your vision and lengthen your perspective. These are a few that have been helpful for me and might be a starting point. 1 Corinthians 2:9, as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no heart has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Psalms 121, verses 1 and 2. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. The second way that we can practice big picture listening is to, like Mary, take time to sit in his presence. And so that comes with, quieting the worries and concerns that we often heap on God and curtailing those prescriptive prayers that we're so quick to pray. Accepting yourself as you are before him. It means allowing the pressure of the moment or the pressures and expectations that others or ourselves put on us to fall away. That sounds easy, but just like everything else, it's extremely difficult and will require time and practice to normalize it. A few different practices that have helped me to integrate this into my life are journaling, quiet time and reflection, time in nature, and time spent engaging in worship. The final way that I want to share to expand our vision and practice big picture listening is to prioritize love. To prioritize love. Because at the end of the day, that's God's vision for you and his vision for others. See, we're called to represent Christ to the world and to call out his image in other people as well. And that means not concerning ourselves with always having to be right, or always nailing the details, always knowing the answer. It returns us to where we started today, to the concept of the mirror dimly. So, as we close, I'll invite you to reflect on this passage and allow the words to remind you of the nature of God's voice, how we listen to him. This is how it sounds when he speaks. This is how his voice sounds regarding others, and the way to completeness as we use our collective voices to glorify him. Pay attention to how worldly attainments and details of our accomplishments fall away. So if you're wondering how and where to start listening to God's big picture perspective, start here. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I thought like a child. I talked like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.